Hello everybody, my name is Bricklayer Bricks. Today I have another exciting alternate build I'm going to be showing off. We're going to be looking at the 501st ARC-170 Starfighter made from 4 501st Battlepack. Just a reminder, I've made a Patreon page where you can get early access as well as the PDF version of these instructions. The free video version will not be available until next week. With that out of the way, let's jump right in. Starting at the front, we have the super iconic nose design. One of my favorite parts are these flag pieces where I put the 501st decal. I think that's the best place to put it. Pretty happy with how these angles came together as well. Those smooth slope pieces come in really handy. Moving on to the front cockpit, we have the pilot here. He's got a nice field of view he can look out of while flying the ship, and that blue piece just pops right off for easy access to the cockpit, which I'll get into a bit later. And of course, on either side of him are those two massive engines. I had to get a little bit creative here because, as we all know, the 501st Battlepack does not have that many rounded pieces, and the ones it does have are pretty small. And the ARC-170 has those huge engines, which I really wanted to capture and do justice. I think what I came up with comes pretty close. Moving on to the middle of the ship, we have the co-pilot seat, or maybe this is the gunner seat, I'm not exactly sure. But nevertheless, you have one minifigure in there. This cockpit can actually open up on a hinge instead of just popping off, which is nice. In front of him, there's one control panel inside of there, and behind him, there's some storage for blasters or other items. Now, in between the two cockpits, I made this little astromech looking thing. It's supposed to represent an astromech droid. It's not the greatest, but I'm sure if you wanted to, you could find a way to modify this to fit the actual Lego astromech. Finally, the third cockpit is the rear cockpit. This guy is controlling the rear cannons to fend off any droid starfighters. That's another cockpit piece that just pops right off, and he also does have the same control panel and the same storage clips behind him as well. And of course, on either side of him are the rear part of the engines where all the power comes from. And on the very back of the ship, we have these two turrets that can move side to side. They can go up and down to help him fend off those droids. Now, speaking of fending off droids, let's take a look at the side cannons really quickly. These things are massive. Another element, just like the engines of the ARC-170, that's kind of a defining feature, and I really wanted to capture. I'm super happy with how these turned out. I love all the detailed black parts on there. I think it really makes it stand out in a good way, and the design is really simple. They just clip right into the wings. Now, the wings themselves, I will have to say, was probably the trickiest part of this thing to design, just to try and get it sturdy enough because they stick so far out, and again, using limited pieces with the 501st Battlepacks, I came up with a solution for the secondary wings, the S-foil wings, that I think works really well. Basically, I have a way to lock them into the open position. It's really simple. This handlebar piece just goes in between them and gives it that fixed angle so it can't move up and down. The way these wings are designed, they have the two joints that allow it to move, but on their own, without the handlebar piece for support, they'd be too floppy and potentially drooping down. If you do want to have this displayed without the wings open, you certainly can do it, but just know that gravity over time could cause these to droop down and not look so great. So that's why in the instructions, I just have you build the handlebar piece in there right away. And if you're going to be taking this handlebar piece out, you want to make sure that you have the little black circles in the wings themselves before you put the handlebar piece in. That's going to save you a headache by keeping that handle piece from going too far in. The whole assembly does come out and can be put back in if you just want to take out that handlebar piece. And here's what it looks like with the wings closed if you're curious. Now, one thing that I did want to incorporate into this build was working landing gear. The bottom of this is not suited very well to just set it down. So I made a way that you can have it on display without it just being plopped down like it just skidded in for a landing. There's 3 points of landing gear. They're all fully retractable. So in the back, you have these 2 ball joint pieces that are on the locking hinge plates. They just fold up and down. Pretty simple and effective. And in the front, we have this slightly more complicated landing foot. Basically, the whole thing folds down, and then you have to fold this front piece 90 degrees. So the little point of this triangle is inside the little anti-stud circle on the bottom of the cockpit. And the reason that has to be in there is because it kind of locks it in place. Another important thing to note is that landing gear piece is directly beneath the front pilot. So you should be able to press down on that front pilot while you're putting him in and not have the whole thing collapse. And that's a good segue to talk about what the best way to put in these minifigures is. You want to start by removing all the cockpit pieces, front and the back. Just pop them off, and the middle one you can just fold up. I started with the back, putting the rear gunner in. There's one of those black half tiles that he fits nicely on. It's really easy to just plop him in there. Once that's done, you can go to the middle, and again, he has another black half tile where he just fits right into. Now, the front is a little trickier. Like I said, the front pilot, he's directly on top of that front landing gear piece, so you should be able to push him down there, but there's no black half tile. It's just 4 studs. You might have to use a little bit more force. But yeah, push him down there, and then you can fold the handlebars in and connect him to the handlebars. Now, this is a good time for me to say, do not grab this thing by the front. it will break off. The front is probably the most fragile part. As for everything else, the build is actually pretty solid, but that front nose section, don't grab it there. It's only held on by 4 studs, as well as the handlebars, which the minifigure is holding onto, which kind of complicates things a little bit. Just trying to get the angles right and the height differences right with his hand. So once again, do not pick this up by the front nose section. I also would not recommend, picking it up by the wingtips. You can kind of do one hand on each wing more towards the middle, but the way that I would definitely recommend picking this thing up are the sloped gray sections on either side of the middle cockpit. It's a really beefy section of the ship, and it also is a great place to grab it for swooshing. Alternatively, there is one good section on the bottom to grab it from where these 2 gray brackets stick out, kind of a textured place where you can put your finger and your thumb. That definitely works too, but it's a bit harder to set it down that way. And finally, I should say certain things like the engines, the cannons, they do kind of stick out, so if you're, swooshing it around, just be careful. Something might, catch on something and break off. That's Lego, we just have to deal with it. Overall, I would say this build is pretty sturdy. It's definitely sturdier than other things I've made. The front cockpit is definitely the weakest part, but it's not going to just fall off from just sitting there. As long as you don't grab it by that area, it should be good to go. Now, there is one final element to this build, or maybe 3, I should say. There was a good amount of leftover pieces, so I came up with a few little side builds that complement this thing really well. I made a little transport/maintenance speeder for the crew of the ship to get around and get to their ship. I made a little command post thing with an auto turret and a small command station. And finally, I made this thing, which I'm gonna say is a mechanic droid of some sort. He kind of turned out kind of silly looking, but he's a lovable character for sure. So the transport speeder, it holds 5 plus the pilot. Up front, there's these 2 fuel tanks on either side, which you can go and use to refuel the ship with. This little nozzle thing just pops out and you can put it right into the ship. And on the back, there's these 2 little sticks for the ground crew to use to communicate and direct the pilots, like you see with planes in real life. I'm not sure how practical that is in Star Wars, but I thought it was a cool little addition. And that's the transport speeder. Moving on to the little command station. Like I said, there's this auto turret with 2 cannons on it and some missiles. It's connected to this small little armored bunker thing that has a communications antenna, and on the back it has some storage for binoculars and a blaster, as well as space for one minifigure to use this control panel. And finally, we saved the best for last. This is the mechanic droid, here to assist you in all your starfighter repair needs. He's got this giant wrench in one hand and a welding torch in the other, there to fix you up, maybe crack a joke, and send you back on your way. And that's about it, guys. I hope you liked this video. I hope you enjoyed the build. If you choose to build it, please leave a comment, a like, and a subscription if you so desire. That would be awesome. And once again, if you want to build this thing right now, go to my Patreon page. The lowest level is $3 a month, and with that, you get early access to the instructions up to 2 weeks early, as well as the PDF downloadable version of the instructions. Otherwise, there will be free instructions available for this build in 1 week. That's going to be in a video format, which will be posted here on YouTube. Thanks again, everyone, so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next week.